Welcome to the Customer Machine Podcast, hosted by Dr. Glenn Livingston and Yoav Ezer. Glenn is a psychologist and marketer whose companies have sold more than $30 million in consulting and has trained thousands of marketers across different niches and industries. Yoav is a programmer turned marketer whose companies have sold over $5 million in products and services. Together, they'll teach you how to systematically stand out, attract, and convert the best customers, even in brutally competitive markets. And now, here's Glenn and Yoav.
Hey, Glenn.
Hey.
So what are we talking about today?
Well, I could tell you what I did this weekend, or else we could talk about the best way to develop a unique selling proposition and how you can detect it rather than just sit and stare at a blank page and figure out what it is. What do you think? Which would you rather do?
Did you do something very exciting over the weekend?
No.
Or just cleaning the house again and moving
Mostly cleaning the house and caught up on some sleep.
Let's talk about the unique selling proposition.
Yeah, that'd be better for people listening, I think.
Yeah. Okay. So, before we begin, you have done a lot of work in this niche, in this kind of research approach to find out your unique selling proposition, to discovering unique selling propositions. Would you mind describing the research you did, just quickly?
Well, I'm a psychologist by training, and I spent a lot of time researching the underlying motivation for purchase and how people react to advertising. And I did that I sold $30 million of consulting along with my wife to large companies like AT&T and Lipton and Novartis and Whirlpool and Panasonic and Kraft and those kinds of companies. And we did it largely by interviewing thousands and thousands of people, mostly in the United States and in more recent years internationally, about why they purchased this or that, and linking it to psychological traits and doing some very in-depth, soulful interviewing about their personalities and their deepest needs. And over the course of the time that we did that, we really developed a system for codifying the emotional drivers of purchase. That's the best way to say it. And in a world where there were a lot of advertising agencies going around talking about emotional drivers, but not really knowing exactly how to define that or how to really link it to the more rational features and functions of the products that people were buying. Our unique selling proposition was that we had a very logical way of understanding the emotional drivers of purchase, and in the end, it turned out to be a very logical way of detecting, discovering, and then architecting your unique selling proposition. So this is not something I dreamed up over the weekend while I was cleaning the house and taking naps. This is the result of a decades-long career in developing a system, a very systematic way of thinking for unique selling propositions.
So I'm going to ask you another question because this is very interesting. In your experience, how important is it to find the unique selling proposition for a business?
I think it's everything. I think without a unique selling proposition, then you're a Me Too commodity, right? And you might be able to make some money. You might be able to have a business for a while, but you're going to have to compete on price. You're going to have to compete with hustle. You're going to have to say things louder. When you have something unique to say that's uniquely beneficial to the customer, you don't have to scream it. And by screaming, I mean, put $50 million of advertising behind it, right? If you've got something that's really unique, it starts to spread in and of itself, and you just need to do enough to get noticed. When you are, if you think about all of the fruit vendors on the Lower East Side of Manhattan or something like that, they, unless they've got fruit that's really that much better than everybody else's, they really have to work hard to get your attention.
Right.
And they can't charge that much. And yeah. So I think it's everything, particularly for small business people who don't have the capacity to scream.
Right.
They don't have $50 million to advertise things.
Right, because big businesses have the budgets to scream louder than the smaller businesses.
Yeah.
So you really have to get your unique selling proposition in place if you even want to compete. Yeah.
Well, it's the reason why people should buy from you. And when you have that, you have something to cohere all of your communications around. You have an underlying foundation for your brand. Without a unique selling proposition, you don't really have an identity. And there's nothing that holds, one email you send that really sticks it to the next one. There's nothing that glues your products together. There's no identity, which then becomes a shortcut for all the features and benefits that your customer really wants to see. And every sales effort becomes a churn. It becomes a drag, an awful lot of work.
Yeah.
So, I think it's everything.
Good. So let's get into the meat of things. How do you identify the unique selling proposition?
Well, before we talk about identifying it, can I just define some terms?
Sure.
I think that a unique selling proposition should be based upon a unique point of difference, a point of difference benefit. And I distinguish point of difference benefits from price of entry benefits. The price of entry benefits are all of those features and functions and benefits which every product in the market has to have in order to even be in the running for the consumer to consider purchasing them. Whereas the point of difference is the unique benefit which makes your product and service stand out from all the others in the marketplace, gets the customer to choose yours over and above all their other options. It's the point of difference benefits that really gets customers to open up their wallets and make the purchase. And so that's why you need to you can't just jump in and brainstorm, well, what's your unique selling proposition? You need to do an assessment of the category. So if we're, if we're selling a book about how to solve Sudoku puzzles, we need to make a list of all the reasons that people play Sudoku and all the reasons that people would buy a book on Sudoku. They want to look smart. They want to entertain themselves. They're looking to, delay dementia by exercising their cognitive capacities. They want to exercise their brain. You need to make a list of all of those things. Then you need to understand what are the emotional reasons behind those benefits. So, for example, people that want to delay the onset of dementia, they really want to feel in control. They want to feel safe and secure. They want to feel confident that they're going to maintain their faculties the rest of their life. And so each of these benefits, each of these reasons that people actually might want to purchase a book about Sudoku, we call those category benefits, and they really form that's the landscape against which your unique selling proposition is going to live and needs to stand out. And once you know what all those benefits are, then you can look at, well, what does your product do over and above what everybody else's product do, and what emotional reasons do people have for wanting that thing that your product can do. So now I forgot the original question. Do you want me to talk about how to get to that? Or?
How to get to... So what you're saying is that we want to identify the point of difference benefits we have with our product or our service, and to do that, we first have to understand the landscape, which are all the different benefits and features the competing products or services have.
Yes.
So that's the starting point.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then if you understand the landscape, and I have something to add to that in a second, but if you understand the landscape and you know, let's say we know how to uncover the point of difference benefits, which you're going to tell us, right?
If you're nice.
Okay, good. And then how do we create a unique selling proposition out of that? We know, we understand the landscape.
Okay. So why don't we go through a few examples of price of entry versus point of difference so that people really understand and really get a sense of what that is. And then we'll talk about a methodology for figuring out what your point of difference might be.
Sure. Okay.
Okay. So a long time ago, I had a publishing company, and we had all sorts of different books about different topics. They're mostly how-to books. And what all these books had in common was that they were all research-based, and they all stood on a very clear point of difference. So, for example, in the radon market, radon is this invisible poisonous gas, and it causes lung cancer, and it's generally assessed before a real estate transaction is allowed to take place. And so if you're selling your house, you need to have, or buying a house, you need to have a radon test before the transaction will take place. And every testing company in the market, every book in the market about radon testing had to tell you whether your house, whether your transaction qualified for the minimum government threshold for safety, right? So if I remember correctly, in New Hampshire, the minimum threshold might have been 4 picocuries. It's measured in the parts per million.
Mm-hmm.
And when we researched that market and talked to people and then talked to some of the expert, we found out that, just because it's below the government threshold doesn't mean that it won't cause cancer. And so the real test that you wanted to buy were the tests that would show you whether the level was low enough to actually be safe to raise children in the house, right? Mm. Just because the government, I remember joking with my friends, there is an acceptable level of human feces according to the government in your drinking water. Mm-hmm. And to me, there is no acceptable level of human feces. And it's kind of the same thing. Like the government sets these levels, and there's an acceptable level of, picocuries of radon, but really you don't want to have anything that could remotely cause cancer for your children. And so once we figured that out, we really centered the book around how to go beyond government thresholds and make sure that your house is really safe for your kids. And that's, that became the point of difference benefits. And eventually we were the only book that was really telling people how to do that and how to mitigate the radon to get it down to that level. And so I think you can see why that would stand out.
Yeah.
From the crowd. Yeah.
Yeah. Especially as a parent. Yeah. I would and do anything to protect my children.
And come to think about it, I think a book about drinking water that explained that there's no acceptable level of human feces in drinking water would probably sell pretty well too.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
So an ad for that book would be something like the acceptable level of radon in purchased houses, the government acceptable level for radon in purchased houses kills 420 kids each month. Are you willing to? Yeah.
Yes. Warning: the government is not protecting your children.
Right.
Yeah, and especially now after what just happened in Flint, Michigan, that would be very believable. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Good. So, what about the alpacas?
Well, alpacas are these really cute, fuzzy animals. They kind of look like a llama, but they're fuzzier and their fur is a lot softer. And
they spit, don't they?
They do spit if they're mad, but they don't get mad too often. Okay. I actually kind of went up and kissed one. They're really nice. And I've got a picture of me unnaturally kissing an alpaca.
You have to send me that one.
I will send you that picture. Yeah.
That has to be in the presentation, really.
Okay, I will send it to you as long as you don't publish it when I run for governor someday.
Sure.
Anyway, they are what's unique about them is they generally only have one baby, and it takes 11 months to gestate. And so the combination of the desirability of their fur, I think they call it fur, they might call it hair or fleece, the desirability of the fleece with the difficulty in, breeding them quickly, it created for a while a real bubble in the market, and they were a very expensive animal. There were many alpacas that were selling for $10,000 to $15,000 each. And so alpaca breeding became an actual business, and there were all these different streams of revenue, and the government, because they're farm animals, the government, I think they still have this, but they've changed the law a little bit, so this is not tax advice, but there's something called Section 179, and essentially, I think the way that it worked was that even if you financed the purchase of the alpacas, you could depreciate them on your taxes right away. And so the government was essentially, you could save more in taxes than the actual cost of getting into the alpaca business would be. And so, there were people that were advertising, here's how you can let the government start your alpaca business for you. Okay. And so then every educational product about how to get into the alpaca business had to teach you about, how do you take care of an alpaca, and how do you find a good veterinarian, and what are the different streams of income in the alpaca business? How do you sell an alpaca? What happens if they get really, really sick? Where do you source your hay? Where do you source the feed from? How do you clean up after them?
Fascinating.
Yeah. So those were all price of entry benefits for any educational product. There weren't that many educational products at the time I did this. But what I realized was that the biggest financial reason that people were getting into it was interesting because the women were going into it because they're all cuddly and loving, and they thought it was going to be a stress-free lifestyle, and it's not a stress-free lifestyle.
No.
I went and visited a bunch of farms, but the men were really doing it for the financial reasons, and they're, if you're going to take that big of a tax deduction, you really need good tax advice from a certified accountant that knows what they're doing with Section 179. And so I realized that those people were hard to find. Those kind of accountants were hard to find, and that I could make it a very appealing product if I went out and interviewed certified professional accountants, certified public accountants with an expertise in the alpaca industry. And so now when the men were thinking about making this monumental financial decision, they could not only get advice from one CPA who was specializing in the alpaca industry, but they could hear a whole bunch of them. And that became our point of difference. That became our unique selling proposition that, actually in that industry, the unique selling proposition was save an enormous amount of time and energy in researching the alpaca business by hearing in-depth interviews with real CPAs and real alpaca ranchers who specialize in the alpaca business.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So while everyone else taught how to raise alpacas and treat alpacas and just the technical aspects of the tax aspects, you discovered, and we'll talk about how you discovered in a second, but you discovered that the in-depth interviews with the CPAs is really what people wanted because it's such a huge tax issue. Yes.
Okay. Yes. I mean, the competitors, they had information about it, but it wasn't the same. If you wanted to spend an hour with 6 different certified public accountants who specialize in the alpaca industry, you'd have to do 20 hours of research to find them and connect with them and make appointments. You'd probably have to drive around to see them. They might be all over the country. It would be an enormous amount of work. And yet that's really what people wanted to do in order to be comfortable with the decision. And so that it was a really powerful point of difference benefit.
Awesome. Okay, let's move on to Sudoku.
Let's talk about your book marketing club first, because I did 2 of them, and then I'll do
Okay.
Okay.
So as you know, I've been running a book marketing club where I help authors sell more of their book. I don't know if you know that, but the average author or most authors sell less than 300 copies of their book in their lifetime.
Really?
Yeah.
That's sad.
So what you're selling of your book in a month, they're selling like over the lifetime of the book.
Wow.
And that's the average.
I don't know if people know that I have a book, but okay, thank you.
Okay. And so when I started studying the market, everybody in the market, and they still are, everybody in the market talked about how to make your book a bestseller. Everybody talked about it. Every course, every training, every coach, every mentor, they all talked about how to make your book a bestseller. And while that's important, there is some value to making your book a bestseller. It's not enough. There's other things you need to take into account if you want to be successful. It's not nearly enough. And B, it's really easily done. So I'll give you an example. I keep saying to my students that just being a bestseller is just getting your book to be a bestseller is easy, and in by itself doesn't help at all. So eventually, after a few months, one of my students called me out, and she said, if it's so easy to do, let's do it. Let's make my book a bestseller on Amazon. So I rounded up a bunch of people, and I asked them to buy her book as a favor to me on a specific day. Mm-hmm. And I think I asked you to do that.
Yes, you did.
I did. So, and on that day, she became number one in one of her categories. So she got to be a bestseller in one of her books categories, and number two in another category. So she really blazed the bestseller charts. And what happened is that she was there for like a few hours, and then her ranking quickly deteriorated, and she made the amount of sales I produced, like that I called around 20 people. I asked around 20 people to buy her book, and then she made 22 sales, all in all. So being a bestseller, other than having the ability to brag about it to your friends and family, made her 2 additional sales.
So she could get a latte at Starbucks, and that was about it.
A latte, and talk about how she's a bestseller,
yes,
best-selling author. Yeah. And then there's my other students. So here's the thing. I'm going to tell you a secret. The secret. This is really the core of what I teach. The secret to making a decent living as an author, specifically if you're a fiction author, is getting Amazon to sell your book via email.
Getting Amazon to sell your book via email?
Right. Amazon's most powerful vehicle for sales is their email. Is their email blast.
That. Interesting.
Yeah. And everybody talks about categories and ranking in categories and ranking in the overall Amazon list. But Amazon has 500 million, 800 million customers. And if the Amazon algorithm decides that your book will produce money for them, then the algorithm will send out emails with your book in it, with a recommendation to buy your book in it.
Interesting.
So if you're an Amazon customer, right, Glenn?
Sure.
You get mails from Amazon like every day, or maybe.
That's true. I do.
Right.
True. So and I don't block them because they're Amazon.
Right. So the trick is to get on that email train. And a few of my customers that have done everything right, we won't get into that. So they had a big launch. they didn't get to be number one in their category. One got to number 11, one got to number 3. They didn't get the bestseller ranking in their category, but they did a very good launch, and that signaled to, and they did another thing, which they made their book convert well. Their book page converts traffic well into customers. And once they did those two things, they signaled Amazon that their book is an asset. And because Amazon is a partner with you in selling your book, every time Amazon sells a copy, they get a cut out of it. Then they added it into their email component, and they've been getting steady sales ever since. So my unique selling proposition is how to get your book to be a constant seller, a constant source of income. It takes more time, it takes more effort than becoming a number one seller, but it produces a lot more sales.
For authors that actually want to eat.
For authors that actually want to eat. Yeah.
That's great. That's great. And that's a very strong point of difference benefit. And you can see how that becomes a platform for all your communication, right?
Right, right. And it's not easy to do. It's actually, it's very, you need to be more precise in your marketing work. And, you know, it's not a problem for you because you've been marketing for 30 years now. But with authors, you need to be very precise and pay attention to all the different elements. And only when you do that, you get to go on the email chain and make a living.
So authors are fabulous writers, not necessarily good marketers, right?
Right. So that's my point of difference benefit, and it sells well. It really sells well.
And then the last one I'll talk about is the Sudoku market, or Sudoku. I think gosh, I forget how to spell it now. It's been a long time. This one built a list of 250,000 people in just a few months. It was crazy. This was when Sudoku was all the rage. And what my partner at the time realized, there was all this education about how to solve Sudoku puzzles, but the different algorithms that people were presenting for solving Sudoku puzzles didn't work on every single Sudoku puzzle. And he figured out an algorithm that would solve every single one. And so we just wrote a book called How to Solve Every Sudoku Puzzle, every last one. And that was the point of difference that really, blasted that book into the stratosphere from, out of the...
It was a huge market at the time, right?
It was a huge market at the time, yes. This was like in 2007, something like that. It was crazy.
I remember my dad spending hours on solving Sudoku puzzles.
Yeah, they love it. They love it.
Cool. So how do you discover what your unique selling proposition is?
Okay, so let's go to the next slide. And I think there are other ways to do this, but I think the best way really involves talking to the customer, getting the customers and prospects surveyed, and then actually talking to them in focus groups and individual interviews. And the reason is that you can, depending upon how you present the survey, how you solicit people to the to take the survey itself, and how you structure the survey, there are all sorts of clues that people leave with regards to how desperate they are to find the answer that they're looking for. And when you find people that are really desperate to find an answer, usually it's because they can't find the answer elsewhere. So let me give you an example. This was my classic formula. What I would historically do, and you have to alter this a little bit nowadays because the advertising platforms are not as keen about you just running surveys through paid advertising. But way back when, I used to take out an ad on Google, and let's say I was trying to figure out how to market the Sudoku book. The ad on Google would say something whenever someone searched for Sudoku or how to solve Sudoku puzzles or Sudoku tips or something like that, it would flip up an ad that said, everything you need to know about Sudoku all in one place, all about Sudoku.com. And you'll notice they didn't say anything about the survey in the ad because I wanted to be sure I could generate the traffic.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted people who were legitimately looking to find and or buy information about Sudoku. I didn't want people who wanted to take a survey. And then we got to the page and it would say that I was writing a book about Sudoku and I wanted to be sure to answer all of their questions, and I just needed them to answer a very brief survey, and if they would, then I'd give them a free copy of the book.
Nice.
And yeah. And I would have 3 questions. One is, what's your single most important question about Sudoku? And that would be open-ended. And then I would ask them, how difficult was it to find the information while you were searching online today? The answer to your question. And not at all, somewhat, or very. And then, why were you searching? Why were you searching for the answer to this today? And there are several things you get in that situation. First of all, there's the response rate to the survey itself. If the market is saturated and people are finding what they want after they click the ads, or on the free listings and the organic listings on the left-hand side of Google, if they're finding what they want, they're not very likely to want to bother taking a survey. And so you'll get much lower response rates. If they're not finding what they want, that means there's a real market gap, and they're willing to engage with you, and because they're going to have to wait a little bit to get those answers, right? So,
right.
And the internet is really about instant gratification whenever they can get it. So if they can't get instant gratification and they're willing to engage and wait, that's a good clue that there's an opportunity to be had. The second thing that you'll find is that people who give longer answers to those open-ended questions are better prospects than people who give shorter answers. Because if I'm really desperate and I write you an essay about how, oh my God, my grandmother is on her last legs and the only thing that makes her happy is to play Sudoku, and she's getting pretty good at it, but she's really frustrated about this one puzzle, that's a much better prospect than someone who says, I just wanted some Sudoku tips.
Right.
And so you can begin to isolate, like let's say you survey 200-300 people, you can begin to isolate the kinds of respondents that are likely to purchase from the others. You can still use the things the other people are looking for to identify benefits you might want to include in your solution, but you really want to focus on what I call the hyper-responsive people, the people that are really willing to engage and tell you their story, and it's almost like they want to sit down and have lunch with you and have you come up with a custom solution.
Nice.
And so I started scoring the surveys based upon how long the responses were, and I can give people a little scoring sheet to go along with this presentation if you want. And then what I started doing was I would multiply the score. If they told me, I would double it if they told me that it was very hard for them to find the answer elsewhere, because that's just like a very straightforward question, right? Like if maybe 20% of the people would say they couldn't find the answer anyplace else, and then I would, across the hundreds of surveys that I did, I would look at what was different about the things that people were looking for where they said they couldn't find the answer as opposed to where they could find the answer.
Right.
And that's how you start to identify those
gaps,
those market gaps. Yeah. And then another thing that I like to do in the surveys was ask people if they would be willing to talk to me by phone to explain what they meant. And, a small percentage of people would do that, but it gave me the opportunity to actually put the flesh on the bones. So I could call people who deeply engaged in the survey, who were hyper-responsive according to the survey, who had identified what those market gaps were, and then I could hear from the horse's mouth what was the story.
Mm,
Was it really that their grandmother was dying and, Sudoku was the only thing that made them happy um, and I got all sorts of light bulbs going on when I would do that about how to bring the point of difference benefit to life
right.
and how to be like how to be really sure that that was the point of difference benefits to stay with. And I got a reputation, by the way. Um, I did this for like 20 different publications, and 17 of them were profitable right out of the gate, which is pretty rare if you're trying to start a business that
Amazing.
way.
Yeah.
And a couple of them were extraordinarily profitable. There are a couple of them, like I sold over $100,000 of a little $10 book about guinea pigs and one on body language, and Sudoku was really profitable. So, I had very hard empirical evidence that this method was working, and and it's just really because I, did the work up front to intercept people that were looking for this stuff and then talk to them. I kind of thought through what the indicators of hyperresponsivity and market gaps would be. And then I talked to them about the point of difference benefits before we chose what those point of difference benefits would be.
So basically, it's a scientific way to identify the market gaps, and then you'd build your entire product and marketing around that.
Yes, that becomes a unique selling proposition, and it's the platform for it's your reason for existence in the market. Yeah.
Brilliant. Brilliant. So I want to add something to this.
Yeah, but could I just give you my mother's phone number and have you call her and tell her that I'm brilliant, because it would really help me out.
Sure. I'll call right away.
Okay.
Um, that there used to be a time where I was very much involved in raising investments and getting funds to my companies. And what I found out when you approach VCs, when you approach investors, they usually already understand the market landscape. When you spoke about point of entry benefits and the common benefits and features of products in the marketplace, they already have that map. And if you get into their room, if you step into their room and present something they already know that's a part of the existing landscape, you're done. You can just walk out. But if you talk about a gap, if you identify a gap, if you teach them something new, the chances of you getting investments is exponentially better.
Wow, that makes total sense. I mean, if you ever watch Shark Tank, they're always asking, well, what's different about this? How come every other competitor can't do it?
And if you watch Shark Tank, you actually see that they make the investment decision before they ask the first question. If you're talking about something new, if you're educating, you're talking about something new that they don't know and that they see the benefits and that you have proof that it's beneficial to the market, you get the shark's money.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, it shows you how important it is to do your homework before you start the business. Because everything looks different. It's easier access to funds. It's a product that sells much better than just another product, and everything becomes easier.
I love it. I hadn't thought about that implication, but that makes total sense.
Good. So we're running a little late. Let's quickly talk about how to use the USP in advertising.
Well, I mean, this begs the question, have you fallen in love with your product, or did you fall in love with the market? And after a long career in marketing and getting my head handed to me a number of times in my early entrepreneurial projects, I realized that you need to fall in love with the market before you fall in love with the product. So a lot of this whole discussion is much easier if you haven't really built the product until you went out and researched the market and figure out where the market gap was. I do talk to a lot of entrepreneurs who, got an investment or spent a lot of money or a lot of time building a product that they're in love with, only to find out when they do the research that it's just another price of entry benefit, and we're going to have to really work hard to detect once you have the landscape of the benefits in the market and you know what the point of difference benefits could be, then if you already have a product that's built, you then have to do another research phase to detect the match between your product and the potential point of difference benefits. So then you have to interview the people who bought your product and love your product and figure out exactly why they did that, and can any of those be morphed into something that is where the market gap is. So for a lot of people that are listening, that might describe them, and I don't want them to feel like all is lost, because there's usually a way, if you ask enough people about why they are buying your product and you have the knowledge of where the point of differences are, where the market gaps really are, there's usually a way that you can reposition things to be more in line with where the market gap is. So I wouldn't want you to be frightened of doing all this work to learn where the point of difference benefits, because you've already built the product. But you do have to be willing to totally reposition the product if you want to take advantage of this. So does that make sense, Yoav? Or
totally, and I want to add on this point, because this is perhaps the most important thing we'll ever talk about. I've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, and more importantly, many years of my life trying to build businesses around Me Too products.
Mm-hmm.
Just wasted years of my life. It's not even the money. It's the time that you spend, that you waste on trying to push. And when you first start, when you're a young entrepreneur, or when you're starting out as an entrepreneur,
you think you're going to live forever.
Right. You're full of energy. You're full of joy. And I'll break those walls, and I'll go through those barriers, and I'll work 18-hour days, and I'll make it happen. And then years later, you understand that other companies have massive resources, which you don't have, and your product doesn't do you any favors. And if you really want to make the most out of your life as an entrepreneur, you want to pivot as fast as you can and come up with a product that the market really likes, and then you'll get all you can still work 18-hour days, but then you'll get all the benefits of having a successful product or a service.
Exactly. Yeah. So, essentially, when that's very well said, by the way. When you know what the point of difference benefit is, you know what your USP needs to be, then you first want to take a look at the product, and you want to maximize the delivery of that benefit. This is not just about advertising. This is actually about meeting the market gap and delivering those benefits, and then everything else in your business will become so much easier if you do this. Like if you really have something that meets that market gap, everything else just starts to fall into place. So it's worth the time and the money and the expense to put that together. Secondly, you want to go back to the advertising, and you want to, with that point of difference, you want to go back and look at specifically how the most hyper-responsive people in your surveys and your focus groups, how did they phrase the desire for that benefit? And you want to use their language to the best extent that you can. So we'll give you a little scoring sheet, and using the factors that we talked about the level of engagement and how difficult it was for them to find things, you assign one score to every response, and then you can sort all of the respondents in the survey by that score, and you can just look at the top 20%, or sometimes the top 20% of the top 20%, or the 4 or 5% of the people that were really most engaged, and look for clues in that language about how to about the type of copy to use when you're advertising back to people. And maybe we could do a whole other show about specifically how to translate research into advertising copy. Maybe that would be a valuable thing for people to.
I think so. But let's just give one quick example.
Go ahead.
So what you're saying, I'm trying to go back to the Sudoku example. Mm-hmm. So instead of having an advertisement that says 30 best Sudoku tips, download now, you'll have something that says, is Sudoku driving your grandma crazy?
Yes.
Get the Sudoku algorithm that solves every problem. And
at how to solve every Sudoku puzzle.com.
Right. And save your grandma's sanity.
Yes.
The last bit of it.
That's it. That's it.
Okay.
Sorry, Grandma, I love you.
Yeah.
if you're listening in heaven, Grandma, I love you.
Okay, got it. Okay, so, and there was one other particularly interesting thing about this is that you could actually tailor your advertising to call out people who are prone to get on the phone with you.
Well, yeah, this is extremely valuable if you have a telesales follow-up process. Now, remember, in the survey itself, we asked people if they were willing to let me follow up on the phone with them to clarify what they meant. Well, one benefit of that is I know who I can call, right?
Right. The
other benefit of that is I can analyze what's different about the responses. Like what I always say, the real gold in a survey is between the questions, not really in the questions themselves. So if I look at everybody who said I could call them versus everyone else, what were their issues? What did they say was their single most important question about Sudoku as opposed to everybody else that we talked to, like the people who wouldn't let us call them? And so then when I'm trying to generate phone calls, I want to use advertising that addresses the issues of the people who said I could call them. I mean, it only makes sense, but no one really thinks to do that. So you can isolate advertising copy that's more likely to generate phone calls and generate people willing to let you call them back.
Okay, let me see if I get this. Let's say I'm a radon testing company.
You're a radon testing company.
I'm the whole thing. I own a radon testing company,
okay.
And I want to get people on the phone. I have a very, very good telemarketing process. I want to get them on the phone. So if I run a survey and I see that people asking me to call are very concerned, are primarily concerned because they're just buying a house and they have kids, then I would run an ad that calls out parents who are currently buying a house.
Mm-hmm.
And that would increase, yeah, that makes sense. That would dramatically increase the chance of them giving out their phone number.
Okay, yeah.
Nice. Very nice. Cool.
Okay, remember to tell my mom.
I will. Thank you, Glenn.
Okay.
Thanks for your time and attention. For more information about the products and services we offer to help dramatically grow your business, please visit thecustomermachine.com. On behalf of Glenn and Yoav, thanks for listening.